Who Goes There? By John W. Campbell, under the name Don A. Stewart. Read by me, some asshole. The place stank. A queer, mingled stench that only the ice-buried cabins of an Antarctic camp know, compounded of reeking human sweat and the heavy fish oil stench of melted seal blubber. An overtone of liniment combated the musty smell of sweat and snow-drenched furs. The acrid odor of burning cooking fat and the animal, not unpleasant smell of dogs, diluted by time, hung in the air. Lingering odors of machine oil contrasted sharply with the taint of harness dressing and leather, yet somehow, through all that reek of human beings and their associates, dogs, machines, and cooking, came another taint. It was a queer, neck-ruffling thing, a faintest suggestion of an odor alien among the smells of industry and life. And it was a life smell. But it came from the thing that lay bound with cord and tarpaulin on the table, dripping slowly, methodically, onto the heavy planks, dank and gaunt under the unshielded glare of the electric light. Blair, the little bald-pated biologist of the expedition, twitched nervously at the wrappings, exposing clear, dark ice beneath, and then pulling the tarpaulin back into place restlessly. His little bird-like motions of suppressed eagerness danced his shadow across the fringe of dingy gray underwear hanging from the low ceiling, the equatorial fringe of stiff, graying hair around his naked skull, a comical halo about the shadow's head. Commander Gary brushed aside the lax legs of a suit of underwear and stepped towards the table. Slowly, his eyes traced around the rings of men sardined into the administration building. His tall, stiff body straightened finally, and he nodded. 37. All ear. His voice was low, and yet he carried the clear authority of the commander by nature, as well as title. You know the outline of the story back of that find on the secondary pole expedition. I have been conferring with the second commander at McCready and Norris, as well as Blair and Dr. Cooper. There is a difference of opinion, and because it involves the entire group, it is only just that the entire expedition personnel act on it. I am going to ask McCready to give you the details of the story, because each of you have been too busy with his own work to follow closely the endeavors of the other. McCready? Moving from the smoke-blued background, McCready was a figure from some forgotten myth, a looming bronze statue that held life and walked. Moving from the smoke-blued background, McCready was a figure from some forgotten myth, a looming bronze statue that held life and walked. 6 feet 4 inches, he stood as he halted beside the table, and with a characteristic glance upward to assure himself of the room under the low ceiling beam, straightened. His rough, clashingly orange windproof jacket he still had on, yet on his huge frame it did not seem misplaced. Even here, 4 feet beneath the drift wind that droned across the Antarctic waste above the ceiling, the cold of the frozen continent leaked in and gave meaning to the harshness of the man. And he was bronze, his great red bronze beard, the heavy hair that matched it, the gnarled, corded hands gripping, relaxing on the table planks were bronze. Even the deep sunken eyes beneath heavy brows were bronzed. Age-resisting endurance of the metal spoke in the cragged, heavy outlines of his face and the mellow tunes of the heavy voice. Norris and Blair agree on one thing. That animal we found was not terrestrial in origin. Norris fears that there may be danger in that. Blair says there is none. But I'll go back to how and why we found it. To all that was known before we came here, it appeared that this point was exactly over the south magnetic pole of the Earth. The compass does point straight down here, as you all know. The more delicate instruments of the physicist, instruments especially designed for this expedition and its study of the magnetic pole, detected a secondary effect, a secondary, less powerful magnetic influence about 80 miles southwest of here. The secondary magnetic expedition went out to investigate it. There is no need for details. We found it, but it was not the huge meteorite or magnetic mountain Norris had expected to find. Iron ore is magnetic, of course, iron more so, and certain special steels even more magnetic from the surface indications. The secondary pole we found was small, so small that the magnetic effect it had was preposterous. No magnetic material conceivable could have that effect. Soundings through the ice indicated it was within 100 feet of the glacier's surface. I think you should know the structure of the place. There is a broad plateau, a level sweep that runs more than 150 miles due south from the secondary station, Venwall says. He didn't have time or fuel to fly further, but it was running smoothly due south then. Right there, where that buried thing was, there's an ice-drowned mountain ridge, a granite wall of unshakable strength that has dammed back the ice creeping from the south. And 400 miles due south is the South Polar Plateau. You have asked me at various times why it gets warmer here when the wind rises, and most of you know. As a meteorologist, I'd have staked my word that no wind could blow at negative 70 degrees, that no more 5-mile wind could blow at 50 without causing warming due to friction with ground, snow, and ice in the air itself. We camped there on the lip of that ice-drowned mountain range for 12 days. We dug out camp into the blue ice that formed the surface and escaped most of it, but for 12 consecutive days the wind blew at 45 miles an hour. It went as high as 48, and it fell to 41 at times. The temperature was 63. It rose to negative 60 and fell to negative 68. It was meteorologically impossible, and it went on uninterruptedly for 12 days and 12 nights. Somewhere to the south, the frozen air of South Polar Plateau slides down from that 18,000-foot bowl, down a mountain pass, over a glacier, and starts north. There must be a funneling mountain chain that directs it and sweeps it away for 400 miles to hit that bald plateau, where we found the secondary pole, and 350 miles further north, just the Antarctic Ocean. It's been frozen there since Antarctica froze 20 million years ago. There has never been a thaw there. 20 million years ago, Antarctica was beginning to freeze. We've investigated, thought, and built speculations. What we believe happened was about like this. Something came down out of space. A ship. We saw it there in the blue ice. A thing like a submarine without a conning tower or directive vanes. 280 feet long and roughly 45 feet in diameter at its thickest. Vanwall, space? Yes, but I'll explain that better later. McCree's steady voice went on. It came down from space, driven and lifted by forces men haven't discovered yet, and somehow, perhaps something went wrong then. It tangled with Earth's magnetic field. It came south here, out of control probably, circling the magnetic pole. That's a savage country there, but when Antarctica was still freezing, it must have been 1,000 times more savage. There must have been blizzard snow, as well as drift. New snow falling as the continent glaciated. The swirl there must have been particularly bad, the wind hurling a solid blanket of white over the lip of that now buried mountain. The ship struck solid granite head-on and cracked up. Not every one of the passengers in it was killed, but the ship must have been ruined, her driving mechanism locked. It tangled with Earth's field, Norse believes. No thing made by intelligent beings can tangle with the dead immensity of a planet's natural forces and survive. One of its passengers stepped out. The wind we saw there never fell below 41, and the temperature never rose above negative 60. Then, the wind must have been stronger, and there was a drift falling in a solid sheet. The thing was lost completely in 10 paces. He paused for a moment, the deep, steady voice giving way to the drone of wind overhead, and the uneasy, malicious gurgling in the pipe of the galley stove. Drift. A drift wind was sweeping by overhead. Right now, the snow picked up by the mumbling wind fled in level, blinding lines across the face of the buried camp. If a man stepped out of the tunnels that connected each of the camp buildings beneath the surface, he'd be lost in 10 paces. Out there, the slim, black finger of the radio mast lifted 300 feet into the air, and at its peak was the clear night sky. A sky of thin, whining wind, rushing steadily from beyond to another beyond under the licking, curling mantle of the aurora. And off north, the horizon flamed with queer, angry colors of the midnight twilight. That was spring 300 feet above Antarctica. At the surface, it was white death. death of a needle-fingered cold driven before the wind, sucking heat from any warm thing. Cold and white mist of endless, everlasting drift, the fine, fine particles of licking snow that obscured all things. Kinner, the small, scar-faced cook, winced. 5 days ago, he stepped out to the surface to reach a cache of frozen beef. He had reached it, started back, and a drift wind leapt out of the south. Cold, white death that streamed across the ground blinded him in 20 seconds. He stumbled on wildly in circles. It was half an hour before rope-guided men from below found him in an impenetrable murk. It was easy for man or thing to get lost in 10 paces. And the drift wind would then, probably more impenetrable than we know, McCready's voice snapped Kinner's mind back to welcome dank warmth of the ad building. The passenger of the ship wasn't prepared either, it appears. It froze within 10 feet of the ship. We dug down to find the ship, and our tunnel happened to find the frozen animal. Barclay's ice axe struck its skull. When we saw what it was, Barclay went back to the tractor, started the fire up, and when the steam pressure built, sent a call for Blair and Dr. Cooper. Barclay himself was sick then. Stayed sick for 3 days, as a matter of fact. When Blair and Cooper came, we cut out the animal on a block of ice, as you see, wrapped it, and loaded it onto the tractor for return here. We wanted to get into that ship. We reached the side and found that the metal was something we didn't know. Our beryllium gronds and non-magnetic tools wouldn't touch it. Barclay had some tool seal on the tractor, and that wouldn't scratch it either. We made reasonable tests, and even tried some acid from the batteries with no results. They must have had a passivating process to make magnesium metal resist acid that way, and the alloy must have been at least 95% magnesium. But we had no way of guessing that, so when we spotted the barely opened locked door, we cut around it. There was clear, hard ice inside the lock where we couldn't reach it. Through the little crack, we could look in and see that only metal and tools were in there, so we decided to loosen the ice with a bomb. We had deconite bombs and thermite. Thermite is the ice softener. Deconite might have shattered valuable things, and where the thermite's heat would loosen up the ice, Dr. Cooper, Norson, and I placed a 25-pound thermite bomb, wired it, and took the connector up to the tunnel to the surface, where Blair had the steam tractor waiting. 100 yards the other side of that granite wall, we set off the thermite bomb. The magnesium metal of the ship caught, of course. The glow of the bomb flared and died, and then it began to flare again. We ran back to the tractor, and gradually the glare built up. From where we were, we could see that the whole ice field illuminated from beneath with an unbearable light. The ship's shadow was a great, dark cone reaching off towards the north, where the twilight was just about gone. For a moment it lasted, and we counted 3 other shadow things that may have been other passengers frozen there. Then the ice was crashing down and against the ship. That's why I told you about that place. The wind sweeping down from the pole was at our backs. Steam and hydrogen flame were torn away in white ice fog. The flaming heat under the ice there was yanked away towards the Antarctic Ocean before it touched us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have come back, even with the shelter of that granite ridge that stopped the light. Somehow, in the blinding inferno, we could see great hunch things, black bulks glowing, even so. They shed even the furious incandescence of the magnesium for a time. Those must have been the engines, we knew. Secrets going in blazing glory. Secrets that might have given man the planets. Mysterious things that could lift and hurl that ship and had soaked in the force of the Earth's magnetic field. I saw Norris's mouth move and ducked. I couldn't hear him. Insulation. Something gave way. All Earth's field they'd soaked up 20 million years before broke loose. The aurora in the sky above licked down, and the whole plateau there was bathed in cold fire that blanketed vision. The ice axe in my hand got red hot and hissed on the ground. Metal buttons on my clothes burned into me, and a flash of electric blue seared upward from beyond the granite wall. Then the walls of ice crashed down upon it. For an instant, it squealed the way dry ice does when it pressed down between metal. We were blind, groping in the dark for hours while our eyes recovered. We found every coil within a mile was fused rubbish, the dynamo in every radio set, the earphones and speakers. If we hadn't had the steam tractor, we wouldn't have gotten over to the secondary camp. Van Wall flew in from Big Magnet at sunup, as you know. We came home as soon as possible. That is the history of that. McCready's great bronze beard gestured toward the thing on the table.